Welcome to the Africa Map Circle Explorations. Explorations focuses upon how to use maps to learn about just about anything in reference to Africa. For example, we've used the Africa Map Circle to learn how to use maps in reference to African history. The West African slave trade is well mapped with maps from the 18th century, 17th century, even as far back as the 16th century, right up through the 19th century. In addition, in looking at the historical maps of the early colonial period, you can look at mapping Africa in reference to its imperial history, how Europeans penetrated the continent and conquered it. We can learn, in effect, anything through maps about ancient African history, the history of the slave trade, history of the scramble for African territory on the part of Europeans, then a great deal about the European colonial rule throughout Africa. Then, finally, the struggles for independence in each country on the continent, and everything that's happened since. Maps have a way of encapsulating history so that they're very useful techniques for learning and teaching about African history. Now, with the online technologies and techniques developed for studying African historical maps, the Africa Map Circle is now exploring how to use maps to learn about Africa and the coronavirus pandemic as it continues to evolve. This is a new challenge in a way because the historical use of maps have dealt with maps that exist for particular periods, are printed and circulated in such a way that they need to be referred to again and again. But the maps themselves are not evolving with current circumstances. They're historical documents. On the contrary, though, with the coronavirus pandemic in Africa, maps from one week to the next are different. In fact, even from one day to the next can be different. So there are new challenges involved in learning how to use maps in reference to currently evolving events. The goal of this initiative is threefold, and in fact, we can look at it very carefully, one after another. First, the goal is to provide readily available public access to timely information on the evolution of the coronavirus and this crisis in Africa. Second, the effort is to provide educators and students at every level of teaching and learning, whether it's high school, junior high school, college, or graduate study, or well beyond the public in general, with new assets to use in constructing their online curricula, either in schools or in self-education that's now taking place on the internet because of the global lockdown. And third, the effort is to elicit and inspire the youth to expand and extend these tools in the development of their own novel online teaching and learning platforms. Those things are going to happen, and they aren't happening already, in fact, around the world. And that's where the initiatives can be very helpful to inspire one another and share the information in an organization like the Africa Map Circle, not just for Africa, but beyond Africa to the world. We can envision similar things emerging in the Middle East, in Asia, in India, and throughout the world as we learn how to use these online assets for educational goals of learning about current circumstances. To accomplish these goals, the Africa Map Circle is working in coordination with major university libraries and online research libraries from all over the world to link new sources of information, images, and data to maps. For example, Boston University is one of the leading library systems devoted to Africa in the world. It's not just an American asset, it's a worldwide asset. On its homepage, you can readily find, for example, that there are links to research. Now, this is research not only done at Boston University, but research around the world available through electronic connections and access to the internet. If you click on that research button, you'll get to a page that says research at the BU libraries, not just at BU, but at the BU libraries. And if you look in the right-hand column, you'll see that they put out a number of library guides developed by professional librarians within the Boston University library system. If you click on library guides, you'll get quickly to a whole series of different kinds of library guides. But again, in the right-hand column, look for research guides. These research guides can get you right into the information available internationally, globally, online. If you click that, you can see, for example, that they come up with subjects. If you sort it by subject, you can see at the top of the subject list are those beginning with A, obviously, like African Studies. And there you can see that there have been 47 different study guides developed for African Studies. If you click on the African Studies link, you'll get a list of all those 47. And you can see, in effect, at the very top of that list is the Africa and major disease outbreaks. This is a research guide that's been put together by one of the professional librarians in the African Library at Boston University Library System. His name is Gabe Odunya, and he's put together for the African Library within the Boston University Library System a very helpful guide called Africa and Major Disease Outbreaks. In his About This Guide section, you can read about this here. He places the COVID-19 crisis in the context of a larger history of Africa's interaction with disease over time. It's very useful. And read the guide on its own, and you can see how he's placing this in a broader historical context. Below that, he connects to, through a link here, a whole series of news assets. These are news feeds which come into the library, and you can explore them one at a time. He's using 3 major RSS feeds, or really simple, stupid is what that stands for, RSS. And these are feeds that are coming in from All Africa News, the Health Desk, the WHO, the World Health Organization, African Regional Office, featured news, or the African Newsroom Health News. Now, these are 3 sources of news, and he taps into all 3 of them very helpfully for us. When you go interactively into this, and we'll do that in a minute, you can see how the titles change as you move from one source to another. And in addition to the news and the news sources that he lists here in the center, he has a left-hand column that links to other resources. In particular, there's a link to the coronavirus in Africa, selected as sources. Take a look at that by clicking on it, and you'll see, in effect, if you click on the information circle right within it, a brief description of what it is. Coronavirus Africa, selected sources. Basically, It's a website or a web blog under construction with selected resources on the coronavirus in the world, in Africa, and among the Africa diaspora. Very interesting idea. And it includes links to data sources, reports, discussions, and selected news stories. If you click on that, you can get out to this directory, which is called Coronavirus-Africa, a preliminary directory. The emphasis is on preliminary because these things are changing daily, and in fact, major changes occur in weeks and months. So you're updating not to particular resources, but to categories of reference to access those resources. Let's take a look. So when we take a look at the Boston University Library front page, you can see, as we mentioned previously, that there's a research link down in the left-hand corner. And if you click on that, you get right to the research at Boston University Libraries, which contains these library guides. If you click on that, you get to the library guides. And as we mentioned, if you click here on research guides, you'll get to the listing of the different research guides. If they're sorted by subject, you can find the African Studies ones right there on the top. Click on that and you'll see what we mentioned earlier, the Africa and Major Disease Outbreaks study guide that's been put together by Gabe Adunya. Very helpful. He's a professional librarian, one of the 3 professional librarians in charge of the African Library. And you should look at his material very closely because it's very rich in learning about all aspects of African studies. As I mentioned, if you read his About the Guide, he emphasizes that it's placing the COVID-19 crisis in the context of a larger understanding of African history and the wave upon wave of epidemics, pandemics, and health crises that have occurred in Africa ever since recorded time. If you click on the news sources, as I mentioned, you'll get to his 3 different sources of news. Watch how these change in terms of the titles below them as I move from one to the next. You see? Over here, yet again, a different set of titles. Different titles from each of these different sources. Africa News, All Africa News under the Health rubric. The World Health Organization, Africa Regional Office, featured news. And the Africa-Newsroom Health News is another source. He draws upon all 3 of those. Explore those at great length, and in future discussions of this resource, we'll look at those in detail. But notice as well that he brings into focus related guides over here, including one called Coronavirus-Africa, which if you link to it, comes up with that title, Coronavirus-Africa, a preliminary directory to resources. Now, it's important to emphasize that it's a preliminary directory because these resources are changing daily. So what you're going to get here is a series of links to categories of resources, very important categories and sources that they themselves update on a regular basis, usually daily, certainly weekly. And we can look into some of those at great length in the future. One of the things we want to emphasize, though, in looking at maps is the way in which this little preliminary directory has within it a section focusing on maps and graphics. It's called Indexes, Maps, and Graphic Charts. You can scroll down to that and see quickly the links that are provided here And further, it says there's further discussion of these and other sources with this link. So we'll take a look at this. When we take a look at the list, it's interesting to see what is highlighted and what sources are more useful than others. Take a look at the indexes, maps, and graphic charts section. You'll notice that there are a couple of basic indexes, like the Bing index that's used to call up images and trackers. And Wikipedia has its own insights. They have an impressive page on COVID-19 pandemic globally, but then they have a separate one on Africa as well, which is quite informative. The BBC News Network, or conglomeration, worldwide largest English language broadcaster in the world, has put together a coronavirus tracker of their own to track the news. In addition, a lot of them borrow a platform that's developed out of Johns Hopkins University called Our World in Data. Similarly, a big social science and geographic software utility company called Esri has started to develop disease maps, solutions, and resources, and you should check those out one at a time as well, clicking on the links that are provided. Finally, there's a situational awareness in Africa provided by Cedric Moro. It's an individual who's done some very creative work. There's further discussion of some of these sources in detail on a resource that you can click to from this index. It's called Some Map and Graphic Sources to Track and Analyze the Impact of the Coronavirus Pandemic in Africa, 2020. It's new and subject to rapid revision as new sources become available. But let's examine briefly three key sources of maps and graphics that you can get access to immediately and start to use for your own research and teaching. One is the CDC, that is the Center for Disease Control in Africa itself. This is distinct from the American Centers for Disease Control. They're not related in any way, but the Africa CDC is put together by the African Union. A second major source is the World Health Organization's Africa Regional Office, and they have a lot of useful data that can be drawn upon, as well as weekly updates. And finally, this COVID-19 Africa map is a very useful one, and it's linked to charts as well that are very helpful for each country. So these are the three we'll look at: Africa CDC, WHO, AFRO Department, that is the Africa Regional Office, and the COVID-19 Africa report. When we go to the Africa CDC resource, we can look quite quickly at the total continental report of cases and deaths. They have a thing called the Africa CDC dashboard, which you can link to directly. And it is updated sort of simultaneously. Here we have 683,000 cases, over 14,000 deaths. And you can see that you can zero in on the map to each country and get the country statistics in each case, country by country. There are further information resources on this page, and you should check them out, including a whole series of things about best practices meant to convey to African public health officials how to cope with the virus. But in addition, there are brochures and promotional materials and guidance for each sector. as well as what's called an outbreak brief. Now, these are provided periodically. You can see they go in reverse chronological order here. The most recent is on the left, outbreak brief number 26, then number 25, 24, going back to June, early July, and July 14th is the latest one. If you click on that, you can get out to the, the outbreak brief for the 14th of July. You can download this, and in fact, it's available in Portuguese, French, and English, and you can download it. But these are brief verbal descriptions of what's going on. There's no great graphic material to draw upon here. But you can go back and look at the other sources of information for this. Instead of the CDC, let's take a look back at the other main source of information out of Africa, which is the World Health Organization's regional office, WHO AFRO, as it's called, the African Regional Office. It's a branch of the WHO in the UN system, and if you click on that map, you'll get out to their information. Now, their information has a dashboard as well, and it shows country by country material, and their dashboard is a bit more comprehensive in terms of the globe. But once again, the summary material is presented country by country, so you can call it up within that context. You can zoom in to the level of a particular country that you want to find out about, and you get the global statistic for that country. As you go down the website, you can learn a good deal more about individual AFRO, African Regional Office material. But again, these are country by country entries with a statistical summary, as it were, for that country. Now, if you click on that country, you can get sort of the thing highlighted and an indication down below of what the particulars are in that country, as well as the region. So it's a useful resource, certainly for the graphics, and you can find out a whole lot more on it from exploring it at will, as it were. The statistical material is also summarized in a series of charts, which are quite helpful if you want to look at trends. And these two can be drawn upon over time to look at a weekly average. If you look at the health topics that they put up, for example, in the regional office, the health topics for the coronavirus are placed on a different page, but you can get access to it through that link that you just saw. In addition to live updates through YouTube once a week, usually this is on Thursday the 16th, they also provide what are called situation reports for the WHO region, the World Health Organization Africa region. Now, these are very useful for updates and for germane graphics. If you look at the latest one, it was provided on the 15th, and we can call it up from here. It takes a bit of time to download usually, but it's a PDF file, and the PDF files can be viewed gracefully. I'll call it up from another source here, but let's see if it comes through in a way that can be viewed here. And this is very useful for updated information on particular parts of the African region, and it has graphics in it that are quite useful for use in your own analysis and research. And if you call it up country by country, you can see how different countries compare with one another, and you can see, more to the point, what the trends are in each area. By country it's indicated, but also by total numbers. Now, the data of up and down material on a historical basis is very evident from the history graphs that they provide down below, along with an indication of different country profiles: Nigeria, Ghana, Algeria. And you can capture these as graphics to use in your own research. Perhaps one of the most useful is this age pyramid structure of the virus, by a pyramid structure that shows that it's largely those from age 31 to 39 who are male who are being affected by this at this time. It's not so much the children or the old age populations, but the middle part of the population pyramid that's being most affected: 31 to 39-year-olds, both males and females, and disproportionately males. And by a new kind of data that's provided here in a very helpful way by this COVID-19 data. It'll show you not only the graphic of the whole of Africa, which is quite useful, but similar to the ones that you've seen in the CDC Africa and the Africa Regional Office of the WHO. But in addition, it then does it country by country over here in a way that you can see which countries are worst hit. And when you click on that number, or that name of the country, like South Africa here, for example, you get a map that's appropriate for South Africa called up immediately. And this is a scalable map too, which means that you can move into it or move out on a greater scale. And as you move in, greater detail is provided, with points on the map indicating further information. Now, this is quite useful for people who want to do detailed research on particular regions in Africa or particular crisis points as it's starting to emerge. Some of the research that's being shared has made it clear that it's the crisis points that are most useful to investigate. When you call it up at a very large scale like this, you can get down to the street level and see the particular hospitals involved. Here are the street maps in Port Elizabeth in South Africa. And you can see, in fact, there are different hospitals providing information. And in doing so, you can drag your mouse over it and get the information from the title. If you click on the source, it will bring the text of that information over so that you can read it. If you go to the bottom of that information, you can click out to the source from which it came. So, for example, this is a longer story provided by the BBC on July 15th. You get the full text of it here, and you can click on the story of it there. Sorry, this is not the BBC. This is a story from South Africa itself, from the Times in South Africa, Sunday Times, pitching in with cleaning. The staff is cleaning beds. Now you're getting the full story here connected to the map. This is quite an interesting and very useful facility for using maps in the study of the development of the crisis. You can see a number of different stories are provided at different points, and you can then zoom back out and go into different parts of South Africa if you're interested in that, or different parts of the whole continent. It provides a kind of parachuting into case study material that's very valuable. And when students, directed by a teacher or coordinated by kind of a group effort, do a number of studies like this, they can look in great detail down to a level of precision that they can't get just by the summary statistics of the country as a whole, which are available through either the CDC Africa or through the WHO Africa Regional Office. In Accra, for example, you can get information, again, down to the level of the street, reporting of different institutions, and call up the resources there. Here's, again, a resource which is a local paper, and you can call out the information from the resource that they provided behind it. This is really quite useful. This is an African Enlightenment site. It's called Doctors Run Away Over Suspected Coronavirus Case in Ghana Hospital. Well, this is indicating in effect how rare it is, but also how unprepared the staff is for coping with it. So you can get access to local stories here on a very much more compelling basis than just the summary statistics provided by the larger scale maps. Anyway, this will give you an idea of how to use the resources that are available now through map sources that are now coordinated. You can move from country to country, from Ghana over to, in this case, the Ivory Coast, and look again at detailed maps. These are road maps, but they're then provided with pins to particular hospitals and particular healthcare centers where there's some material being reported. In this case, it's the number of cases being reported, but you can see in other instances there are particular hospital indications here. Very useful information, quite granular and detailed. Well, let's take a look again at the broader picture then and see what we can accomplish through the African Map Circle. You can see then how COVID-19 Africa has provided a link between map facilities and news and information on a very local level. You can zoom in to find things out that you wouldn't have access to just by reading the newspapers or the news wires. At the same time, you can connect the map information with the news sources. It's a valuable new resource to look at and expand upon, develop in your own work. Some examples of how this has been done are provided through transitionstudies.net, and you can call them up through their little search engine. In conclusion, then, the goals of this initiative of the Africa Map Circle are threefold, as we mentioned: to provide readily available public access to timely information on the evolution of the coronavirus in Africa. Second, to provide both educators and students at every level of learning and teaching with new assets to use in their newly developing online curricula. Both students and faculty are getting involved in creating new forms of learning online, and this is a new and useful asset for that kind of work. Third, it's very much hoped that this facility will elicit and inspire the youth to expand and extend these tools in the development of their own novel online teaching and learning platforms. People want to learn. When given the tools, they can learn, and in fact, they can extend our understanding exceptionally. Usually, the younger ones know the technology more thoroughly than the older teachers, and they can turn around and teach the teachers how to connect the electronic material in such a way that it's useful and publicly available. This is well beyond Africa, but the Africa Map Circle has started with Africa in the hope of inspiring things elsewhere, beyond Africa, to the world. In the future, the Africa Map Circle can provide a platform upon which to share the research results of the creative use of maps in developing innovative online teaching and learning about Africa. But The same kind of platform could be developed anywhere in the world for any purpose of linking maps to data, to timely information. Thank you very much for coming along. Scan in the QR code and find out more about this initiative.